can hear his spurs right now, that slow, deliberate jingle coming up the stairs. The same sound he made when he walked into the Silver Creek Saloon 3 days ago, looking for me. The same sound I heard fade into silence when I buried him in the desert at dawn. I checked his pulse twice. He was dead. I made sure of it. But dead men don't climb stairs. 3 days earlier, I rode into Silver Creek with blood money in my saddlebags and a name I'd stolen from a claims office in Carson City. The town was smaller than I expected, just a main street with a handful of buildings bleached white by the Utah sun, a general store, a church with a crooked steeple, a boarding house, and the saloon. I'd chosen Silver Creek specifically because it was dying. Towns like this didn't ask questions. They were just grateful for new faces. I checked into the boarding house under the name Thomas Garrett. The woman at the desk, Mrs. Holloway, had skin like old parchment and eyes that lingered too long on my saddlebags. She gave me a room on the second floor, corner view overlooking the street. I paid her 2 weeks in advance with a silver dollar that still had desert dust in its grooves. That first night, I heard the Spurs for the first time. I was lying in bed, window cracked to let in the cool desert air, when the sound drifted up from the street, slow, rhythmic, like a clock counting down. I got up and looked through the curtain. A man walked down the center of the empty street, silhouetted against the moonlight. He wore a wide-brimmed hat and a long coat, and at his hip I could see the gleam of a badge. The spurs on his boots caught the light with each step. He stopped directly below my window, didn't look up, just stood there for what felt like a full minute, perfectly still except for the slight sway of his coat in the breeze. Then he continued walking, the spurs fading into the distance until there was only silence. I told myself it meant nothing. Every town had a sheriff. Every sheriff wore spurs. The next morning, I went to the general store to buy supplies. The owner, a rail-thin man named Hoskins, was friendly enough until I asked about the sheriff. His smile disappeared like someone had blown out a candle. "We don't have a sheriff," he said, his hands going still on the counter. "I saw someone with a badge last night, walking down the street." Hoskins stared at me for a long moment. Behind him, a woman I hadn't noticed before, probably his wife, made a small sound in her throat. He didn't look at her. "You must have been dreaming," he said finally. "We haven't had a sheriff in Silver Creek for 8 months. Not since Sheriff Dalton died." "Died how?" "That's not a story for morning conversation." He pushed my purchases across the counter. "That'll be $2. I paid him and left, but the wrongness of it sat in my stomach like a stone. I hadn't been dreaming. I'd seen the man as clearly as I was seeing the dusty street in front of me now. That afternoon, I found myself in the saloon, nursing a whiskey and listening to the bartender, a man called Pike, tell stories to the only other customer, an old prospector who smelled like soil and desperation. I waited for a lull in their conversation, then asked about Dalton. Pike's face went careful. "What do you want to know about him for?" "Hoskins mentioned him, said he died 8 months ago." "That's right." Pike wiped the bar with a rag, his movements slow and deliberate. "Found him in the desert 3 miles out. Someone had put a bullet in the back of his head and buried him in a shallow grave. Coyotes dug him up. They catch who did it? No, but Dalton was looking into something before he died. A claim dispute out near Copper Ridge. 2 partners who'd struck silver, then one of them turned up dead, and the other one disappeared with all the certificates. Dalton thought he'd tracked the killer to Silver Creek, but he died before he could make an arrest. The whiskey turned sour in my mouth. Copper Ridge. That's where I'd killed my partner, Michael, after he tried to claim our strike as his sole discovery. That's where I'd taken the certificates and fled. What was the dead partner's name? I asked, though I already knew. Michael Brennan. Pike studied me. Why? You know something about it? No, just curious. I finished my whiskey and stood. I'm new in town, trying to understand the place. That night, I lay awake listening for the Spurs. They came at midnight, right on schedule. The same slow, measured steps down the empty street. This time, I didn't go to the window. I stayed in bed, covers pulled up to my chin like a child, and listened as the footsteps stopped below my window. A minute of silence. Then they continued on, fading into the dark. On the 3rd day, I decided to leave Silver Creek. Whatever was happening, I wanted no part of it. I went to the stable to collect my horse and found the stable boy, a kid no more than 14, mucking out stalls. "Leaving already, Mr. Garrett?" he asked. "Business elsewhere." That's probably wise. He said it quietly, almost to himself, but I caught it. What do you mean? The boy looked at me, and there was something ancient in his young eyes. Sheriff Dalton, before he died, he used to say something. He said that in Silver Creek, the guilty always confess. One way or another, they always confess. I'm not guilty of anything. Then you got nothing to worry about. But he didn't sound convinced. I saddled my horse and rode out that afternoon. Got about 5 miles before I realized I was being followed. I could hear them behind me, those Spurs, keeping perfect pace with my horse's gait. I urged my mount faster. The Spurs matched my speed, never falling behind, never catching up, just maintaining that constant distance. When I looked back, I saw him. The man from the street, riding a pale horse. The same wide-brimmed hat, the same long coat, the same badge catching the sun. But now I could see his face, and my blood went cold. It was Dalton. I'd seen his photograph on a wanted poster once, back when I was planning my route through Utah. But it wasn't just that I recognized him. It was his eyes. They were fixed on me with absolute certainty, and they were filled with knowledge. He knew who I was. He knew what I'd done. I pulled my revolver and fired 3 shots. All 3 hit him center mass. I watched him jerk with each impact, watched him sway in his saddle. He didn't fall. He didn't even slow down. He just kept riding, those spurs jingling, blood spreading across his shirt like ink on paper. Panic took over. I rode hard, pushing my horse to its limits, but Dalton stayed with me. Always the same distance behind, never closing, never falling back, just following with patient, inhuman persistence. Finally, as the sun began to set, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned my horse around and charged straight at him, screaming, firing my remaining bullets. He didn't try to evade, didn't draw his own weapon. He just sat on his horse and took every shot, his body jerking with each impact, until my revolver clicked empty. We faced each other in the dying light. His shirt was shredded, blood dripping from 6 wounds, but he was still upright, still watching me with those knowing eyes. "What do you want?" I screamed. He spoke for the first time. His voice was dry, like wind over sand. Confession. "I didn't kill anyone." Michael Brennan, Copper Ridge. You put a pickaxe through his skull while he slept, then burned his claim certificates and fled with the silver assay documents that bore only your name. You can't prove that. I don't need to prove it. You know it's true. That's enough." He reached into his coat, and I thought he was finally going for his gun. Instead, he pulled out a length of rope, already fashioned into a noose. "The guilty always confess," he said. "One way or another." I turned my horse and fled into the desert. I rode until my mount collapsed from exhaustion, foam flecking its mouth, its flanks heaving. I abandoned the animal and continued on foot, stumbling over rocks and scrub brush as the last light drained from the sky. The desert transformed into something alien in the darkness. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound became the jingle of spurs. When I looked back, Dalton was still there, walking now, those spurs marking time like a metronome. He moved with the steady, unhurried gait of something that had all the time in the world, because he did. Dead men don't tire. Dead men don't need to rest. They just continue, patient and inevitable as erosion. I ran until my throat was raw, and my legs felt like they were filled with sand. I fell, got up, fell again. My hands were bleeding from catching myself on rocks. My clothes were torn. Still, those spurs kept their rhythm behind me. Not closer, not farther, just there, constant as my own heartbeat. At some point, I began to hallucinate. Or maybe I wasn't hallucinating. I saw Michael standing ahead of me, his skull caved in on one side, the pickaxe still embedded in the bone. He pointed back the way I'd come, toward Dalton, and his mouth moved, but no sound came out. When I tried to run around him, he vanished like smoke. I crawled into a dry ravine and pressed myself against the rocks, trying to silence my ragged breathing. Above me, the stars wheeled in their courses, indifferent to my terror. I could hear the spurs approaching, then stopping at the edge of the ravine. Silence. I counted to 100, then 200. Still silence. I dared to hope he'd lost me. Then a stone tumbled down into the ravine, bouncing off the rocks near my head. I looked up and saw Dalton standing at the rim, silhouetted against the stars. He wasn't looking for me. He knew exactly where I was. He'd always known. He dropped the noose into the ravine. It landed in the dust at my feet, coiled like a snake. "When you're ready," he said, and walked away. I stayed in that ravine until dawn, shaking, unable to move. When the first light touched the desert, I climbed out and found myself standing at a crossroads. One direction led away from Silver Creek, deeper into the wasteland. The other led back. I chose the wasteland. I walked for what felt like hours under the climbing sun. The heat pressed down like a hand. I finished my water before noon. By afternoon, my lips were cracked and bleeding. I left a trail of blood drops in my footprints. The spurs started up again behind me, still keeping that same distance, still perfectly patient. I turned to face him, swaying on my feet. "Why won't you kill me?" I screamed. "Just kill me and be done with it." Dalton stopped. We faced each other across 100 yards of desert. "Death isn't punishment for men like you," he called back. "You need to carry it. You need to confess." "I'll never confess." "Yes, you will. They always do." That's when I realized we'd been walking in a circle. I could see Silver Creek in the distance behind Dalton, the buildings shimmering in the heat haze. But ahead of me, in the direction I'd been walking, I could now see something else. Buildings, the same buildings, Silver Creek again. I was trapped in a loop, and at every point of the compass, there was only the town I was trying to escape. As dawn broke, I found myself back at Copper Ridge. I don't know how. I'd been running in the opposite direction. I was certain of it, but here I was, standing at the mouth of the mine where I'd killed Michael. The entrance was boarded up now. Condemned after Michael's death was ruled an accident. Someone had painted a cross on the boards. The red paint had run in the rain, making it look like the cross was bleeding. Dalton emerged from the desert behind me, that noose still in his hand. His shirt was still riddled with bullet holes, still dark with blood, but he walked like a man in perfect health. The badge on his chest caught the first rays of sunlight. "It ends here," he said, "where it began. You can confess or you can run, but you can't escape." I pulled my knife and rushed him. It was desperation, not courage. I buried the blade in his chest and felt it scrape against bone. No blood came out, or maybe the blood had all been spilled already. He just stood there, looking down at me with something like pity in his dead eyes. I stabbed him again and again, in the chest, in the stomach, in the throat. The knife went in and came out clean each time, as if I were stabbing empty air. I kept going until my arm was too tired to lift the blade anymore, until I was sobbing and covered in old blood that felt too cold to be real. He stood through it all, unmoved, waiting. When I finally collapsed at his feet, my hands shaking so badly I dropped the knife, he knelt beside me. Up close, I could see the bullet wound in the back of his head where someone had executed him. It was still open, still fresh, though he'd been dead 8 months. When he tilted his head, I could see daylight through it. "Confession," he said again, and God help me, I confessed. Every detail, the planning, the murder, the theft, the flight. I told him how I'd befriended Michael in San Francisco, how I'd suggested we partner up to work a claim, how I'd spent 6 months pretending to be his friend while I waited for the right moment. I told him about the night I'd done it, how Michael had been smiling at me around the campfire, talking about his sister back east, about how he was going to send her money from our strike. I told him how I'd waited until Michael was asleep, then taken the pickaxe and brought it down on his skull with all my strength, how it had taken 3 blows to finish it because I'd been shaking so badly, how I'd burned the partnership certificates and forged new ones with only my name, how I'd collapsed the mine entrance to make it look like an accident, then fled with the assay documents that proved the claim's value. I told him everything as the sun rose over Copper Ridge, painting the desert red. The words poured out of me like water from a broken dam, and with each confession, I felt something break inside me. Not relief, something darker. The acknowledgement that I was exactly what Dalton knew me to be, a murderer, a thief, a coward. When I finished, my voice was hoarse, and tears were streaming down my face. Dalton nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd already known. "Thank you," he said. His voice was softer now, almost gentle. "Michael can rest now. He's been waiting." "What happens now?" I asked. "Are you going to hang me?" "I already did." He stood and walked away, back toward Silver Creek, those spurs fading into the morning light. With each step, his form became more translucent, more like smoke than flesh, until he disappeared entirely into the rising sun. I didn't understand what he meant until I reached up and felt the rope around my neck. It was tight, biting into my skin, but when I tried to loosen it, my fingers found nothing. The rope was there and not there, visible and invisible, like Dalton himself. I didn't understand what he meant until I reached up and felt the rope around my neck. I woke up in my room at the boarding house, drenched in sweat, hands clawing at my throat. There was no rope. It had been a dream, a nightmare brought on by guilt and whiskey. But my neck ached as if I'd actually been hanged, and when I looked in the mirror, I could see red marks circling my throat. But when I looked out the window, I saw Dalton standing in the street below, looking up at me. He touched the brim of his hat in a slight salute, then turned and walked away. This time, I noticed something I'd missed before. He cast no shadow. The morning sun was bright and clear, throwing long shadows from every building and post. But where Dalton walked, there was only light. I left Silver Creek that morning without collecting my belongings, without saying goodbye to anyone. I rode straight through to the next town, then the next, putting as much distance as possible between myself and that cursed place. I changed my name again, bought new clothes, tried to become someone else. But distance doesn't matter. Not to Dalton, not to the dead. The first night after I fled, I stayed in a boarding house in Desert Springs, 40 miles from Silver Creek. I barricaded my door with a chair and kept my gun loaded on the nightstand. At midnight, I heard the Spurs in the street below. I looked out and saw him walking past, his head tilted up toward my window. He didn't stop, just kept walking, those spurs jingling, until he disappeared into the darkness. The second night, in a town called Salvation Creek, I heard the Spurs on the stairs of my hotel. They came up slowly, one step at a time, then stopped outside my door. I sat in bed, gun pointed at the door, waiting for it to open. It never did. After an hour, the footsteps retreated back down the stairs. But in the morning, when I left my room, I found something hanging on my doorknob, the noose. It was real this time, solid rope with the perfect hangman's knot. I threw it away in the alley behind the hotel, but that night, in a different town, I found it hanging on my new door. The third night was last night. I was in a place called Red Canyon, a mining town built into the side of a mountain. I took a room on the top floor, thinking height might make a difference. It didn't. At midnight, the Spurs started in the lobby. I could hear them through the floorboards, moving through the building, climbing the stairs. First floor, second floor, third floor. They stopped outside my room. I pressed myself against the far wall, gun in hand, and waited. The doorknob turned slowly, testing the lock, then stopped, then turned again. This went on for an hour. Turn, pause, like he was giving me time to think about what was coming. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I screamed, "What do you want from me? I already confessed." His voice came through the door, dry and patient. "You confessed to me. Now you need to confess to them." "Who?" "The ones who matter." The doorknob stopped turning. The Spurs retreated back down the stairs. I spent the rest of the night sitting against the wall, unable to sleep, unable to think about anything except those words, "the ones who matter." This morning I understood. He wants me to confess publicly, to turn myself in, to face human justice, not just supernatural judgment. But I can't do that. I won't hang for Michael's murder. I won't give them the satisfaction. So I ran again. I'm in a town called Bitter Wells now, holed up in another boarding house, another rented room. It's nearly midnight. I can feel it coming the way animals can feel a storm approaching. The air has gone still. The sounds of the town have faded to nothing. And then I hear them, the Spurs. They're in the street below, slow and steady. I look out and see Dalton walking toward the boarding house. He's carrying the noose openly now, draped over his shoulder like a rancher carrying a rope. As he approaches the building, he looks up directly at my window. Our eyes meet, and he smiles. It's not a cruel smile. It's sad, almost pitiful, the smile of someone who's seen this story play out 100 times before and knows exactly how it ends. He enters the building. I can hear the front door close, hear Mrs. Weatherby, the landlady, say something in a startled voice, then fall silent. The Spurs start on the stairs. First floor. I push my bureau in front of the door, pile chairs on top of it, anything to create a barrier. My hands are shaking so badly I can barely grip the furniture. Second floor. I load my gun, check the cylinder. 6 bullets. I've already learned they won't stop him, but I load it anyway because it's all I have. Third floor. My floor. The Spurs come down the hallway, slow and deliberate. They pass the first door, the second. They stop outside mine. Silence. I can see his shadow under the crack at the bottom of the door. I can hear him breathing, if dead men breathe. Or maybe it's my own breathing I'm hearing, rapid and panicked. The doorknob turns. The barricade I built shudders as he tests the door. Once, twice. Then he stops. Thomas Garrett, he says through the door. Or should I call you by your real name? James Carver. Hearing my true name spoken aloud after all these months of hiding makes my blood freeze. I know you're afraid. Dalton continues. I know you want to run, but there's nowhere left to run to. You've tried distance. You've tried denial. You've tried everything except the one thing that might save you. And what's that? The truth. Tell them what you did. Face what you are. Accept the consequences. They'll hang me. Yes, they will. But a lawful hanging, James, is quick, clean, final. What I'm offering you, if you keep running, is so much worse. Do you want to spend eternity with this rope around your neck? Do you want to hear these Spurs every night for the rest of your days, growing closer and closer until there's no distance left at all? I don't answer. Can't answer. I killed Sheriff Dalton yesterday, in a moment of desperate madness. I shot him in the street in front of witnesses, then dragged his body into the desert and buried him in a grave I dug with my own hands. I felt his cold skin. I watched the earth cover his face. But dead men don't forgive, and the rope around my neck is getting tighter.